this is what we got right now. But yeah, it's a good summer. So like for what do we got right now? Yeah, how you doing, Tsachy?
Yes, I'm doing well right here in my backyard on this beautiful day.
Yeah, you look awesome. Yeah.
So, where is everybody? I mean, in terms of geographical locations, are you guys distributed all over the planet?
Not around the planet right now. This is all students who are learning with AI Camp so far. So far we couldn't support, for example, people around the planet, but this is actually we have so many people from out of state, but most of them I think they're in California.
Yeah. I see. Actually, I'm seeing in the chat here someone from Maryland. Okay, we got Palo Alto, Maryland, Southern California, Maryland,
Oakland,
Austin. Okay, so good spread, at least over the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's great. And that's quite a few of you. Wow, already we're 53.
Yeah.
So how many overall are currently in the program?
Around
That's basically everyone?
Yeah, I mean, everyone here is pretty much in the program. And we're also supporting a few AI clubs around the country. So for example, Neil here, he's in Maryland and he's running an AI club. And yeah, so I just invited him. We also have a few instructors here, for example, Shane, Oliver, myself, which are, some of us were from Stanford, some of us from Carnegie Mellon. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, so what do you guys want to do? Do you want me to just give you my talk? Do you want to chat about other things? You want me to plan for a talk shorter than all our time so that we then have some time for Q&A? You tell me what you guys prefer.
Yeah, I would say, I think I messaged people with the plan that you would give maybe a short presentation or whatever topic you think is interesting, maybe like for 30 minutes or so. And then what's going to happen is we're going to leave maybe, 15 minutes or so for people to ask any questions. Yeah. Would that work?
Okay, yeah. Sounds great.
Okay.
So I should aim for like a talk that ends around like 12:45-ish?
45-ish, 50-ish, somewhere there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's try that. So I'll try and share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Host disabled.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay,
Will you please allow me to share my screen?
Try again. It's a default that's disabled.
All right. So sharing my screen and pulling up my slides. Okay, great. So can you guys see this okay?
Yep.
Cool. So, hi everyone. I'm Tsachy Weissman. I'm on the faculty of the Electrical Engineering Department at Stanford. And what I thought I would talk with you about is, well, maybe first I'll give you a really quick sort of description of what we do in my group, which is primarily information theory. It's like the kind of the more theory and math behind things like, how do you represent information? So how do you represent it succinctly? That is data compression. How do you, communicate it? And that's communication theory. And related areas such as statistical signal processing and communication and machine learning, which you guys know a lot about. And then, one of the topics that information theory is concerned with is, kind of the math behind effective representation of information, succinct representation of information, and that the more kind applied part of that is compression, storage. And so what I thought about, and you know, so much of what we do, have been doing recently, is a focus on kind of applied compression in all sorts of domains for all sorts of different data types, such as VR, for example, is a cool new area for, you know, how to kind of compress and kind of stream data in real time. You have limited bandwidth. You have only so many bits you can send per unit time, and you want to create a good image for the person who's using the VR. And you can actually use new elements, unlike in video here. You can even track kind of where the person is looking to know where to give them increased and better resolution versus, you know, the periphery. So you can play with things like that. There's genomic data compression, where you want to basically be able to store and then process really big amounts of genomic data in order to do all sorts of things that have to do with personalized medicine effectively. We also have this really cool, I think, area of research which is about storage of information and representation of information in DNA. So some of you guys may be familiar with the world of biology and DNA, and you know, every one of our cells has this sort of a DNA molecule in it, essentially the same DNA molecule, and that DNA molecule comprises very small elements that are called nucleotides. Basically, every DNA molecule is just a sequence of nucleotides. Every nucleotide can have one of 4 possible values. And if you think about it, you can use this to represent information. So if you have the technology to either synthesize the DNA molecule from scratch, like you're going to choose what the first nucleotide is going to look like, what the second, and third, and so on. Or if you have technology that some of you may have heard of called CRISPR, to actually edit DNA. So you can take a DNA molecule and then start changing parts in it. Then you can change parts in the molecule in ways that represent information. And that is a very promising potential future technology for representing information that would potentially replace the kind of silicon-based technologies that currently you're using in your computers, your iPhones. You are currently representing or storing information, you're storing bits with a very certain type of technology. Maybe in a decade or two, you're actually going to be representing, storing, and retrieving information in DNA molecules. And that'll be way, way more kind of effective. You'll be using many orders of magnitude less space for representing much, much more information.
Tsachy.
But yes.
Could you move your microphone like a little bit closer to your?
Oh yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, because now I can't hear you anymore. I don't know what happened. I can't hear you. Yeah. Oh, wait.
And now?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Very clearly, yeah.
Let's get rid of these headphones. And are you suggesting that this was the case so far? Like you couldn't hear me?
No. I can hear you, but there was a little bit distortion with the sound, and also like 2 ears, they're not equal sound. But right now it's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, sorry guys.
No, it was fine. Yeah, it was fine.
Okay,
yeah.
So now, but it's okay if you missed everything till now. It's okay because I just kind of told you about some areas on which I work, which are different than what I'm going to talk about today, which is human-centric compression. Okay, so that's a recent project I want to tell you a little bit about. And it actually is the result of this sort of project that in fact started with high school students, not unlike yourselves. And they came in and they were interns in our group like 2 summers ago, Ashu, Soham, and Sean, and they were mentored by some people, some students, some PhD students in my group. And I'm calling this Humans Are Awesome Compressors, okay? And it's about what machines can learn from humans about lossy compression. And I think it can also relate to some of the themes that you guys have been working on in your AI camp, and things that you can continue to work or to think about later. So, image compression, let's talk briefly about what that means, right? So again, compression is about effective representation in bits, right? Like think of images, right? You have like a JPEG image. So you take a photo of something and you store it on your computer or on your iPhone as a file, right? The file is just a long sequence of bits, zeros and ones. That's how your computer stores the image. And then when you want to look at the image, you open up the file and you get a reconstruction of the image. And, image compression is about managing a sort of trade-off between, okay, how effective is the representation? So the shorter the file size, the smaller the file, the better, right? The more you can store on your computer. But you also want the reconstructed image, right, to be a faithful version of the original image. So usually there's sort of a tension. The smaller the file size, okay, the more distortion you're going to have between the original image and its reconstruction. And there are all sorts of formats. Some of you may be familiar with GIF and PNG, which are considered like lossless compression, even though it's not really lossless purely, because an image is of something which is totally analog, like continuous in space, in the amplitude. So and then when we represent it in bits, we digitize it, there's always some degree of loss. But it's called lossless because these formats are, so-called very high resolution. But as a result, they need big file sizes, many, many bits. On the other hand, most of what you're using on your computer is usually with this format called JPEG. And that is considered lossy because there is really a discrepancy between the original image that you took and the one that you reconstruct, but it's done really well, and this discrepancy is hardly detected by our human eye. So it's kind of, it exploits all sorts of things that the human eye doesn't care about to lose all sorts of information, all sorts of irrelevant for us information in the image. And that allows us to get to much smaller file sizes and therefore store many more of these images on your computer. So this is basically the state of the art currently is, what you're still largely using is JPEG. There were some other more recent versions that people tried to come up with that didn't quite make it to the mainstream, like JPEG 2000. Currently, the kind of state of the art is something that Google open sourced recently. So you guys could potentially look at the guts, the under the hood of WebP, and that is the current sort of state of the art. It's like the best in terms of you get smallest size file sizes, and relative for that small file size, you get the best image quality. but it comes at a cost of slightly more computationally intensive things that you need to do in the encoding, which is to create the file from the original image, and then in the decoding, which is when you open up the file to get your reconstructed image. It's slightly more complicated and more computation intensive, and therefore still largely JPEG is what people use. And if we have some time in the end and people ask, I can tell you about some of the principles that go into designing these schemes. But these are currently like the state of the art. And one question we want to know is, should we be happy with these current schemes, these current algorithms that everyone is using for representing images? And, so in general, don't worry, be happy. But specifically in the context of our lossy image compressors, how satisfied should we be? And should we be looking for better schemes than what we are currently using? So I'm not going to, this is noon and we are among friends, and I don't want to give you a whole lecture here about so-called rate distortion theory, which is something that some of you guys who will go on and study in the university areas like electrical engineering or computer science in your undergraduate or even graduate degrees. You will encounter this field that I mentioned, information theory, and it talks about a whole way in which you can sort of quantify what is the best that can be done, the so-called fundamental limits on compression. Some of you may have heard about something called entropy in the context of lossless compression, like how well can you represent information when you want to then perfectly reconstruct the information. So how many bits do you need? There's the notion of entropy. And in the context of lossy compression, there's a notion of rate distortion, which is about, when you also incorporate the loss. So you say, okay, for a given level of distortion between the original data and the reconstructed version, what is like the minimum number of bits that I'm going to need among all the schemes in the world, as complicated and complex as they might be. And so you could potentially hope to, for a picture like this is, by the way, these are not real points based on real data. This is more of a cartoon suggesting that you may hope to have a picture like this, where that would allow you to kind of compare these current schemes to what in principle we might hope to be able to achieve if we optimize them across all the schemes in the world. And I won't go into why, in fact, in practice, you cannot actually get this kind of a curve. So you never really know how much room for improvement there is by just employing things from like information theory. You need to look at other approaches. And an approach that we took was inspired by the founder of my main field, which is information theory. So I talked about information theory, which is one of those scientific fields fortunate to have a precise date of birth in 1948 with Shannon. So this guy right here is Claude Elwood Shannon. He's the founder of information theory with a landmark paper he published in 1948 called The Mathematical Theory of Communication. And there he came up, among other things, with this notion of entropy, which is the best, which is the answer to what is the best that you can hope for in terms of data compression, in terms of representing data succinctly. And when he was asked, okay, so it was relatively theoretical and abstract, but people asked him, okay, how can you in practice use this theory to get insight as to, our current standards for doing things and how much potential we have for improvements. And so he actually, about 2 years later, he wrote this paper where he did apply some of the elements from his work to this concrete problem of, okay, how well should we be able to compress text? So you have like a corpus of text, right? You want to represent a file of text, and we're going to represent it as a file. So a file is a sequence of bits. How good compression can you expect to be able to get? So how many bits are we going to need per representation of one, let's say, letter, if we compress well, if we have a good way of representing the information? And so without boring you with all the details of this work, the important thing that he did in it is try to get an estimate of the so-called entropy by asking people to guess the next. So he would show people the text, a text until a certain point, and then ask them to guess the next letter. What should the next letter be? And by asking them, these questions in a sophisticated manner, he was able to get sort of a distribution on, okay, given, a typical person seeing, a text up to a certain point will give you, if you look over what many people are saying, you get sort of a distribution of, okay, what's the probability that they will say it's this letter, versus the probability that they will say it's this letter, and so on. And with these sort of probabilities, you can get an estimate of the entropy. And through that estimate, you can come up with a number. And he came up with this number, which was at the time, I think the number he came up with that experiment was 1.5 bits, which is to say, we should be able to represent English text with no more than 1.5 bits on average per letter. Okay, and at the time, the way that people stored English text, it was way higher. They needed many more bits per representation of a letter. And it's actually only relatively recently, in the last 2 years, that Google came up with a compressor for text that delivered on what Shannon has shown was achievable. So only relatively recently, Google, with all their AI-based models that you guys may have been exposed to, and were able to slightly even surpass, do slightly better than 1.5 bits per text character. And maybe that should come as no surprise, because now when I use Gmail, I see that Google's predictive capability of, what's the next letter, given what I've written so far, they're often better able to predict than I myself am. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that based on their models, they're able to compress better than what, kind of people have shown based on their own internal models should be achievable. But in any case, the, this kind of an experiment was what was inspiring to us for also understanding, what can be done in the context of lossy, right, slightly lossy image compression. So we wanted to do something similar. We wanted to provide a human-centric approach to image compression, to bring humans' shared language and experiences and knowledge to bear on the problem, just like in Shannon's setting, the fact that a person knows and is exposed to the language and exposed to the culture. We bring all that in some sort of an internal, highly non-trivial model, like neural network model, but literally biological neural network model in their brain, into the way that they predict the next letter. So we want to bring all this to bear on the problem. And then here, there's this additional element that was not existent in Shannon's original paper when it was lossless compression of text. Here we're talking about, you know, potentially lossy, so not a perfect reconstruction, but then what we want is to also tailor to the kind of things that people care about in terms of, you know, what is the right way to quantify, you know, how good a reconstruction is, which is sort of more correlated with the way people view and care about image quality, and less about, you know, more kind of mathematically wieldy measures that people tended to use in the past, such as maybe you guys are familiar with, let's say, squared error and things of that nature. So, and through that, kind of understand what's achievable.
So Tsachy,
yes.
So in terms of time, just don't care about that, you know, because we have time for you. It's really whether you have time, you know, like, you know, I know your schedule is very busy. So, you know, just, you know, use your same pace, you know, go through it. And then, you know, I'm pretty sure, you know, people are willing to stay, and, you know, we will have a lot of questions. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to, so in fact, I do regretfully have something at 1, which I can push a bit, but I'll try to, you know, now give you again, just this sort of very briefly get to the punchline of this particular work. And then, you know, we can talk more according to questions or talk about other things. So I'll quickly tell you that the kind of experiment we ended up performing is to take these 2 people, like 2 high schoolers, one being sort of the describer, and the other being the reconstructor. So they are now forming a human version of a lossy compression algorithm. And so you would have like one of the high schoolers took a photo, and, you know, a photo that none of the others have ever seen, and it's not online, it's not available anywhere. And then sent it to, you know, the high schooler who saw it for the first time, and his task was to describe it only via text to the third high schooler. Okay, the third high schooler has to look at the text description and come up with their reconstruction of the image. Okay, and text, anything is legitimate. In fact, any information, we call it site information, available, say, on the internet, is also kind of fair game, as long as you can present it in text. So you could potentially like use some of the text to describe a URL of where you can retrieve an image that's already available on the internet as maybe a component that you would use in your description of the overall image that you want to describe. So anything that you can describe in text is fair game. And the fact that you're allowing people to take, you know, images that are already on the internet corresponds to the fact that, you know, information which is already on the internet is representative of our collective information, collective frame of reference, this kind of sign information that potentially we can already use. So basically that's the experiment, right? And then what we want to look at is, okay, what is the size of the text? If you had to now store this text as a file, right? That would be the size of the compressor presentation of the image according to this sort of system for encoding and decoding. And we want to compare that to, you know, that according to what the humans have been able to achieve, to what our current algorithms, you know, JPEG or even WebP. WebP is now the best. WebP was also confined to be using the same length of the description, right? A file of a similar length as the description length that the humans needed with their text. Then we want to see how well, like, the human system compares to the, let's say, WebP. And so, okay, so I told you, these guys did this, and I won't go into all the details. I kind of described it to you. But, you know, this is a kind of a snapshot of like the kind of text that they were, you know, a text description, a really small part of the text description. As you can imagine, you know, this was a really long process. Like every image they got, they took like at least a full day worth of, you know, just writing a description of that image. It was very laborious work. There's a saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but in fact, they learned the hard way that a good description of a picture is worth way, way more than 1,000 words. But in any case, and then, you know, so they did this for several images, and I'll show you some examples. And what we looked at was, we evaluated their performance relative to WebP, okay, the state of the art. So let me give you some examples. Okay, and I'll say that, you know, what we looked at was, you know, so this is like the original image, this is a reconstruction that they came up with. And, okay, I don't see, just see something. And you'll see that the kind of question that we asked them was, you know, when we went on Mechanical Turk and we asked many people like to look at the original image versus the reconstruction and grade on their level of satisfaction from, you know, if this had been the original image and this is your reconstruction, how satisfied would you be on a scale of 1 to 9? So, you know, it's not quite, okay, what is the fidelity, you know, how exactly close is it to the origin, but just, you know, how satisfied would you be with this kind of reconstruction? And that we compare it to, you know, how satisfied they would be with if we used WebP for the same sort of size of file that represents the data. That would be similar to what the file for using the text, for representing the text that the high schoolers used. So let me show you first, and I'm going to be done soon. I just wanted to flash a few examples at you. So here's one example. Again, this is the origin. This is what the humans came up with. This is what WebP did. You know, if we use WebP, again, at a compression level such that the file size under WebP is comparable. In fact, we always took, to be more righteous than the Pope, we always took WebP file size to be slightly larger than the file size needed to represent the text coming out of the humans. Okay, so this is one example, and here's another. There's another. There's another. There's another. I mean, here you can see, like, you know, here the fire is way crisper than the fire that comes out of WebP. Right? In terms of details, this fire is like, it's morally similar to this fire, but it doesn't, you know, the details are not the same. Here, detail-wise, it's more similar. But for a human, often what they care about is, well, okay, that it's a fire. And then here's an opposite kind of example where, you know, humans might care about a reconstruction which is identifiable as the original human, and less about maybe the details in that human's faces, like, you know, the irrelevant details like the level of acne is less relevant. So this is an example of, you know, where obviously, insofar as what humans care about, WebP did better. So you can see that, you know, overall, in terms of the, I don't know, a dozen photos that, that they worked with, in general, the human compression did better than WebP, except for those few types of images that had things like faces. And, you know, we can talk slightly more about the details, but basically that's the kind of experiment and work that I wanted to run by you. You're very welcome. We were so impressed by this work. We even made a website that you guys can look at that has many more details. It's called hack we're calling this project Hack Humans as Awesome Compressors. And then, so I guess what I'll basically say is the conclusions were that there's much room for improvement. If we look at, how humans think about and represent and then reconstruct images, we can see that relative to our current standards, there's much room for improvement. And I'll quickly mention that, that what these high schoolers have shown to be achievable and therefore that we might want to strive for in our development of new generation of algorithms for compression, real algorithms that are not, that don't need actual humans, that will deliver on what the humans have shown is possible, is actually what we're currently working on. We're doing kind of, things that are kind of, I don't have time, but we're doing things that are kind of inspired by what students did for images. We're doing it also for audio. We're doing things that now are specifically targeting facial images, which we've seen initially the humans had a harder time with, but now we're actually using, in fact, talking with people like police sketch artists to see what their process is for, asking questions of humans and extracting from humans the kind of descriptions that they need to actually come up with facial images that are reconstructible. And finally, and maybe this is most related to, kind of things that you guys are now working on, or now are equipped with the tools to start thinking about, and we're also working in these directions, is to now deliver on what these high schoolers have shown using tools for machine learning and AI, to now think about how we can automate, how we can take maybe many examples of these kind of protocols that these humans have done, and use them toward an automated system that will work with these kind of principles. And many of you, and probably in your camp, you've already seen that there are algorithms currently where you take in, where the input is an image and the output is a text description, like a whole paragraph worth of a description, right? And then on the flip side, there are now algorithms that will take a text description and output a photo of what was described, right? So that you put these two together, you have essentially this kind of an automated system. The current systems are, they weren't exactly optimized for something like compression, but you can start to understand how these kind of systems can be starting points for the kind of things that we're doing here, and for which then machine learning and AI are highly relevant. And if you guys, and so now we're working on some of this also with high schoolers in a STEM to STEM program, which is highly kind of correlated with what you guys are doing, and potentially some of you can be very interested in applying something like this for the next summer. And I think the tools and the experience that you equip yourself with in this AI camp can be quite relevant and attractive for this program. So with that, I will force myself to shut up and start listening to what you guys have to say or ask.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Tsachy, for giving us this wonderful talk. This is really, really relevant, to what we do. And, as you're just like doing this, I was like, wow, we're actually going to talk about deep captioning. We're actually going to talk about auto encoders, GAN. All these concepts are actually highly relevant, towards to that research. Yeah.
That's great to know.
Okay, so cool. So can if you have a question for Tsachy, could you raise your hand and I can call your name? Anyone?
I'm gonna move to a place where I can hear you guys better. Yeah, I'm with you guys. Please don't be shy. Shoot.
Yeah, don't be shy. Ask any questions. It could be any question, right? It doesn't have to relate to the talk, right?
Bless you, Oliver.
Wait, Oliver, do you know Taki?
No, I just saw Oliver.
I think he just saw me sneeze pretty violently.
Oh. Oliver is actually a student at Stanford. Yeah. Anyone has questions? No one has questions?
Be careful, guys. If no one has questions, I'm going to start asking you guys questions.
I'll ask.
Okay.
You have one,
go
Michael?
ahead. Go ahead. Oliver,
I'm curious. So in the human reconstruction, it looks like it's made up of like images in the public domain. Do you have any idea what their process was for like finding grass that looked similar to the photo? Were they like Google imaging searches with those images and then kind of pasting?
So you can I gave you. I'll share the slides. There's a link to a website that has all the details, including all the script of all the text, and they tried to be resourceful. They weren't. We didn't have the heart to tell them to try to be very effective in terms of not be too verbose or not use too much text, because it was a really laborious project anyhow. So you can see, like, as they start describing, they make jokes, and it's really actually entertaining to go through the script. But let's say in the context of the image you've seen with the giraffes, right? So exactly as you suggest. First, they they just looked online for some shrubbery that might be, with Google search, shrubbery that was kind of similar to the shrubbery that they needed. And then they sent a URL to that. And then they started, okay, you take that and then shrink it a bit and then move it a bit to the right and so on. And they found kind of giraffes that were kind of morally similar to the ones in the original photo and described them and so on. That was like in the context of giraffes. In some other cases, they tried to be resourceful in other ways. And, there are all sorts of points I didn't get to that touch on how, kind of the common language, the common set of experiences can come into play in better sort of encoding and decoding. So for example, you may recall one of the images was of a junction, of an area, a junction, and some of you guys are from Palo Alto. You may have identified it's in California Avenue. And so the person describing that photo actually noticed that, oh my God, that's actually on California Avenue. So what he did was use Google Maps to get to that junction and, and to the right angle. And then all he needed initially was to give the URL to that sort of location on Google Maps and that angle.
I see.
And then build on that.
Interesting.
Got it.
Yeah. I'm also kind of curious in terms of like, like as I learned about like variational autoencoder, you can have the decoder and then you have it encoded first and then you decode it next. You can use that decoder to generate text or images. Have we, like Chucky, what do you think? Like, is it possible for these humans, they can train on maybe a set of images and then generate new images and see how that would actually play against, I don't know what that's information theory, but I would be just so curious to see how humans would, like this whole talk inspired me to thinking about, we place the neural network that, in different neural network algorithms with humans, right? It's just so inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, I feel like there's a lot of room for exploring this sort of constant feedback loop between, real neural nets, like biological neural nets,
right,
and the artificial ones,
right,
to, to deliver on what the biological ones show us is achievable.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so I know you have another meeting at 1 o'clock, but you know it's really our pleasure to have you here. It was such a wonderful talk. I think you know we learned a ton about information theory. So really, really thank you. You know, it's our honor, you know, for you to be here. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. It has been a pleasure. I regret I didn't leave more time to hear more from you.
We have more opportunities later next time. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And have lots of fun and continue to do great work, AI, machine learning.
Yeah, great.
And also put that great work to good, noble uses.
Yeah. We actually, you know, the summer camp has been going through, you know, going on for, you know, maybe 6 weeks now. We have generated so many different interesting applications. So we'll show you next. Yeah.
That's great. Looking forward to, once you have, you know, like projects completed, do send me links.
We will send you a list of links. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah, great. Okay, Tsachy, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Have fun.
Right. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye for now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Okay, so for the ones who are in the summer AI camp, we're just gonna come back with 0 hour session at 1:15. 1:15 that is, okay? And I'll see you guys at 1:15, okay?
Good to see you, Michael.
1:15. Oh, good to see you, Shahab. Thanks for the email. Yeah.